Community land trusts grew out of the civil rights movement in the U.S. The first community land trust was established 50 years ago, led by Slater King, cousin of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Douglas Community Land Trust builds on this legacy, the spirit of Frederick Douglass, and the work of more than 250 community land trusts in different regions throughout the country. Racial and economic justice center our mission. Douglas Community Land Trust is a membership organization. We invite you to join.
Everybody to this presentation on housing rights and accommodations, focusing on disability and including long COVID, right? As we have a very uncertain future coming, we want to make sure that everybody has the ability to exercise their rights and have as comfortable a living situation as possible right now. So our organization is the Douglas Community Land Trust. We are a racial and economic equity organization. We are designed to hold space and keep hold property and trust for the community. We generally do that through creating and maintaining permanently affordable housing by providing ongoing stewardship services, educational trainings, and being a vehicle by which the community can exercise their will on how to use certain properties. So as we're getting a little bit of a late start here, I want to hand it over to our friends at NLSP. Sam, I think that is you. Thank you. And Neighborhood Legal Services Program is one of our most valued partners. We collaborate on a lot of items together, including co-op assistance, and Sam is here to tell you just a little bit more about their other offerings.
Thanks so much, Adam. Hi everyone, I'm Sam Stringer. I'm the project coordinator for our Housing Cooperative Preservation Initiative at NLSP, or HCPI for short. So we provide legal and asset management services to limited equity and low-income housing cooperatives in DC. We offer a wide variety of services, including guidance for boards of directors, assistance with financial management and meeting loan requirements, help with bylaws, co-op policies, and other documents, as well as support for legal matters. So if your co-op could benefit from any of these services, please reach out. I apologize that I do have to drop off the call fairly soon, but please reach out. We'd love to hear from you.
Great, thank you, Sam. And we're going to hear from a couple of other of our community partners, including me, CASA, and HCS a little bit later on. We wanted to get some quick housekeeping before we kick things off, and I hand it off to our friends over at Equal Rights Center. So throughout the presentation, we're going to be offering a couple different polls and questions for people to interact with. So I guess we will try this out with a quick poll. Are you a Douglas CLT member right now? So throughout the event, we're gonna have little questions coming up. That'll be one way of interacting. As a number of you have noted, you can also raise your hand and we will unmute you to give a verbal kind of answer to one of the prompts or to ask more detailed questions. So that will be another way of kind of doing things. I see a lot of people who are going to sign up as a Douglas CLT member. A benefit of membership is participating in the governance of our organization and being one of the first folks to hear about opportunities like this, as well as our specific offerings for our members. So that is one of the many benefits. Let me see what else. We are going to have Q&A. Susie McClanahan is very nicely offered to do ongoing Q&A, which is a little bit difficult to juggle. So I really appreciate it. But we'll be opening it up for Q&A at the end, in addition to these other kind of opportunities for interaction. And again, we will unmute you and bring you all on board. That being said, Susie, I'd love to hand it off to you. Susie is the Fair Housing Rights Program Manager over at the Equal Rights Center. I'll let her provide a little bit more detail to what they do, but they're a critical component to preserving affordable housing, in addition to making sure that everybody has access to it, and they're enforcing their rights as much as they can. So Susie, if you want to, I guess, take over the screen share, it should be up and running for you to take. So we can go from there. Great. Wonderful.
Okay, great. Everyone can now see the PowerPoint, yeah? Great. So my name is Susie McClanahan. I am the Fair Housing Rights Program Director at the Equal Rights Center. We are an organization here in DC that works on issues of discrimination, and we're specifically here tonight to talk about discrimination in housing and the rights of people with disabilities. So to start off with, I'd like to talk about some of our goals with this presentation. So by the end of this training, my hope is that we can all answer the following questions. First, what is housing discrimination? Second, what rights does a person with disabilities have in housing? Third, how do I request a reasonable accommodation or reasonable modification from my landlord? And fourth, who can I contact to report possible housing discrimination? So hopefully by the end of tonight, we will have all these questions answered. The Equal Rights Center is based in Washington, DC, and we are a civil rights organization that attempts to identify and eliminate unfair and unlawful discrimination in housing, employment, and public accommodations. And specifically, we assist people in the Washington, DC area who believe that they are experiencing discrimination in housing. One of the ways that we seek to identify discrimination is civil rights testing. And civil rights testing will frequently involve us pairing two trained individuals who have just one different characteristic to see how discrimination might be happening. So in this case, we have a white man and a black man, and we send in the white tester, and he says that he's looking for a 1-bedroom unit and asks if any are available. The agent says, yes, we do have some available. Please get your application in soon. So he leaves, and the black tester comes in, and he's going to ask the same questions, saying that he's looking for a 1-bedroom unit. Asks if any are available. And they say, sorry, we don't have any vacant 1-bedrooms right now. And this really could be the case in Washington, DC. Housing goes very quickly, but through testing, we can actually seek to ferret out some more subtle forms of discrimination. In this case, for instance, misrepresenting that the unit wasn't available by using testing. So today we're talking about the Fair Housing Act, which makes it illegal to discriminate in housing. And the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968, and it applies to all housing-related transactions. And this is a really broad term. So not only are you protected from discrimination in housing when you're renting, but also when buying or selling a home. It also applies to lending, to insurance related to homes, so like homeowners insurance. It applies to homeowner associations, condominium associations, and housing cooperatives. So this is really quite a broad law. So when we talk about housing, I'm not just talking about renting. Within the law, it is illegal to discriminate based on several different identities. So the first one is race and color. So it's illegal to discriminate based on someone's race. It's also illegal to discriminate based on their national origin. So say, for instance, someone was maybe from the United States, but had their family was from Guatemala. And a landlord tells them, I don't want to rent to you because I don't like Spanish speakers. This would be considered national origin discrimination, even though the person is a US citizen. They're being targeted based off of where their family is from, which is Guatemala. So this would likely be considered discrimination based on national origin. Another type of discrimination is towards families with children under the age of 18, and this is called familial status discrimination. It's also legal to discriminate based on disability, which is what we're going to speak about today. And it's illegal to discriminate based on religion and sex. However, in Washington, D.C., there's actually other identities that are protected as well. So if you live within the district, it is also illegal to discriminate based on one's age, based on their marital status, such as being married, single, widowed, divorced. It's illegal to discriminate based on sexual orientation. So, against folks who might be gay, bisexual, or queer. It's also legal to discriminate based on gender identity and expression. And this is really important for supporting and respecting folks who are transgender, making sure that their rights are also respected. And then it's illegal to discriminate based on source of income. This is some of the most blatant discrimination that we actually see in DC, is towards folks with housing vouchers. And it's illegal to discriminate against someone with a housing voucher, but it unfortunately happens all the time. Additionally, it is illegal to discriminate based on family responsibilities, political affiliation, personal appearance, and matriculation. And matriculation just is a fancy way to say that someone is a student. So all of these identities, it is illegal to discriminate against someone for. Now there's two more, my bad. There's also being a survivor of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. This is a unique protection because generally this is not something that a housing provider would know. So say you have negative information on your background check because of being a survivor of domestic violence. Maybe you had to leave a home early and you got an eviction, something like that. You're gonna have to disclose to the landlord that you're a survivor of domestic violence and you're asking for them to disregard kind of that negative information on your background check so that they know that you're asking for that protection. Then the last one is place of residence or business. I don't see very many complaints based on this, but there was a case by the DC Office of Attorney General in the last year or two, I think against actually a window treatment company that wasn't going to certain parts of the city, frequently Black neighborhoods, to provide services. And so the Office of Attorney General went after them for place of residence or business discrimination. So those are all the protected identities upon which it would be illegal to discriminate against someone. Now, the next question is, well, what sort of actions are illegal? So I want to talk about examples. I think the most obvious one is refusal to sell or rent. So we had a case a couple of years ago where a landlord, meaning to text someone that was living, one of the current tenants, but accidentally texted the applicant herself. He straight out messaged her, "I don't want to rent to her. I think she's African." And so in this case, we actually helped her file a complaint. And we claim that this was discrimination based on her race and national origin. The Virginia Fair Housing Office, the agency that investigated it, agreed with us that this was discrimination. And actually the Virginia Office of Attorney General has now filed a court case on her behalf against that landlord. The next type of discrimination is discriminatory terms and conditions. And so this is to offer or require certain tenants follow certain rules that may not apply to everyone else. So for instance, maybe saying that families with children, can't go to certain parts of the building, or, 17-year-olds have to be supervised in the pool, even though, they might be a lifeguard, they're probably that would make them a better swimmer than me, right? So discriminatory terms and conditions are like different treatment, like with the rules. The next type of discrimination is advertising a discriminatory preference. We do not see a lot of this except for discrimination towards voucher holders, although that we've seen a lot fewer ads in the last year or two about that. And we still sometimes see ads that say things like no felonies, which might be illegal under race-based protections. Then there is misrepresenting availability. So we, for instance, had a client who looked at a unit, and after she shared that she had a voucher, all of a sudden the unit was off the market. And so we suspected that they may have told her that once they knew she had a voucher. So we did testing and found that an applicant without a voucher was being told the unit was still on the market, while the applicant with the voucher was being told that it wasn't. And so in this case, the landlord was likely misrepresenting availability in order to rent the unit to someone without a voucher. Another type of discrimination is blockbusting and steering. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to skip over what blockbusting is because it's not commonly seen very much anymore, but just for background, it generally refers to predatory realtor practices where they try to pressure people to sell units by, for instance, in the past, they try to pressure people to sell units usually based off of a protected identity. Steering is the opposite. Instead of people leaving, it's actually pushing people towards a certain direction. Steering happens a lot when people are looking to buy homes, where realtors might only show you units in certain neighborhoods based off your race. And it also can happen, for instance, for people with disabilities, they might be steered to first floor units, with the assumption being that if someone has a physical disability especially, that they wouldn't want to live in a unit on the third or fourth floor. And it can also happen, say they try to push like Spanish speakers towards certain parts of the building where there's already like significant numbers of Spanish speakers, that would be considered steering. Or pushing families with children towards certain, buildings in a complex to try to have like adult only buildings and buildings just for families with children. Those would all be considered steering. The last is, not the last, but on this page, the last, harassment, threats, intimidation, and coercion. Unfortunately, an example of a common type of harassment is sexual harassment towards tenants by landlords or maintenance staff or, other contractors and whatnot. That is very much illegal, and it's a just horrendous practice. We have also seen a rise in harassment cases in the last year during COVID, based on national origin, especially towards Asian Americans, and race, especially towards folks of color, which is deeply concerning. Finally, the last two, one is inaccessible design. So any multifamily housing, which is like an apartment complex, that is built after 1991 should be moderately accessible. So there are certain accessibility features that they need to have in the units that would assist folks primarily with physical disabilities with being able to use those units. So if you are in a unit that was built after 1991, especially if you use a wheelchair and that unit does not work for you, it's difficult to move around it, things are out of reach, that might be a sign that that unit is actually not built in compliance with the law. And the Equal Rights Center can actually go do like a free survey, like go to your home and inspect it to see if it is in compliance with this law or not. And the last form of discrimination is retaliation. So if you think you've experienced discrimination, have the right to file a complaint against the housing provider or whoever you thought discriminated against you. And it is illegal for them to retaliate against you. So it is illegal to retaliate. And then any other conduct, such as any other conduct that makes housing units unavailable, would likely be considered discrimination as well. So the first example I'd like to give is that a renter receiving disability benefits, maybe Social Security disability, something like that, applies for a property. The landlord says that they require all applicants to have had a job for at least a year. So the person's application is denied because the renter doesn't have a job. So I'm hoping Adam can put up the poll, but I want to ask folks that, do you think this is discrimination? Yes or no? Okay. Yes, great job, everyone. Thank you. Well, seems like we're doing well so far. Okay, next question is, why is this discrimination? So what is the protected class, the protected identity? Is it race, disability, national origin, or familial status? Survey says disability. Good job, everyone. Absolutely. So in this case, the person has income and the income is due to their disability, but the landlord says no, right? You have to have a job. That's going to be discrimination based off disability. And I think there's one more question, right, Adam? Yes, thank you. What is the prohibited activity? Was this refusal to rent? Was this retaliation?
Gonna give just a moment or two. And as a reminder, if anybody wants some clarification, just raise your hand and we'll bring you up. Ending the poll.
Yes, good job. The answer is refusal to rent. So in this case, the landlord discriminated against someone based on their disability by refusing their application, which it would be refusal to rent. Good job, everyone. Thank you for participating. So now I want to talk about actually what disability is, because this is a huge category. And right now, this is something that a lot of us are thinking about, especially as it relates to COVID. And I want to be really clear, I'm not a medical expert. I work in fair housing work. So I, can't talk as to what actually long COVID is. And my understanding from reading the news is it's something that medical experts are still trying to figure out. But we know that people are experiencing long-term health impacts due to coronavirus. And those folks may need and more broadly, people with disabilities, whether or not it's related to COVID, have a right to what are called reasonable accommodations in housing. And disability is quite broad, so I want to spend some more time exploring that. I think the number one type of disability we think about are mobility disabilities. And this is something that affects someone's ability to move. This might be someone who uses a wheelchair or a cane or a walker. You don't necessarily have to use an assistive device. It may just be that, it's really hard to walk long distances or climb up stairs, things like that. But there's many other types of disabilities. So another category is sensory disabilities. These are disabilities that affect the major senses. This could be folks who are blind, deaf, or hard of hearing, maybe don't have a sense of smell or a sense of taste. Another large type of disability is mental health disabilities. And these are disabilities that affects one's emotional well-being. Unfortunately, one of the, I think challenges in people being able to ask for their rights in housing is frequently there's a lot of stigma around disability. And this is especially true for mental health disabilities. I myself have had a mental health disability, and this is just like any other sort of health condition. And people deserve to be respected and to have their rights respected. And kind of while talking about disability, something to keep in mind, if you're not sure whether something, is specifically a disability, the kind of broad question to ask yourself is there what's called a major life activity impacted? And that can be things like breathing. So asthma and allergies would be considered, can be considered disabilities. It can be things like walking. We talked about mobility disabilities or going upstairs. It can be things like, having trouble getting up in the morning or going through your day, having trouble sleeping, experiencing high-level anxiety, things like that. Another category of disability is developmental disabilities. And this just refers to any disability that begins before the age of 18. So for instance, epilepsy frequently starts with children. And so this would be considered a developmental disability. The last two categories of disabilities are intellectual disabilities. And these are disabilities that affect one's ability to learn and acquire skills. And then learning disabilities, which affect how someone processes information. Some other things that I want to mention, I know prior to this presentation, someone had asked me, for instance, like how this applies to pregnancy and childbirth. And while pregnancy itself is not a disability, it is possible, for instance, that due to complications from pregnancy, someone might have a disability. So we, for instance, assisted an individual who had her parking privileges revoked due to receiving lease violations. And this was particularly cruel because she was pregnant and had complications from her pregnancy that made it difficult for her to walk. And so she was no longer able to park in the parking lot. And we asked for a reasonable accommodation that should be given her parking privileges back, regardless of the lease violations during her health complications during the time of her pregnancy, so that she could safely park and be able to just safely enter her own home because it was so difficult for her to walk. So childbirth, again, is also not a disability in itself, but for instance, like postpartum depression would be considered a disability. So the question to always ask is if there's a major life activity impacted. So for instance, with long COVID, I heard a story about a mayor in Kansas who's had to get a pacemaker now after she, during her like very long recovery from COVID. So it's likely that she would qualify for disability under like heart-related conditions, things like that. Are there any questions at this time about how to determine whether something might be a disability?
Indications.
I see someone say yes. Do they have if you have a question and want to put it in the chat, I can make sure to read it. Let's see. Okay, someone said, with allergies, I get constant sinus infections. I think the carpet in my apartment, it sounds like might have something to do with it, and they had to have sinus surgery. I would recommend maybe talking to your doctor to see if there might be environmental reasons. So something, in the air or something like that, that might be impacting why you're having sinus infections, and whether they would consider that a disability. And if, for instance, the carpeting is a problem, that might be something that you could ask for the carpeting to be removed. So I can't say in your specific situation, but that it would definitely be something to discuss. Somebody also asked a question about documentation for disability. which is a great question, and I'm going to answer that later in this presentation. So I'm just going to hold on to that and know that we're coming to that information. Okay, so we've been talking about reasonable accommodations for a bit. I've mentioned a few as examples, but I want to go a bit more in depth now to talk actually about what reasonable accommodations are. So people in housing who have people with disabilities in housing have a right to request reasonable accommodations. And reasonable accommodations are changes in rules, policies, practices, or services that give a person with a disability equal opportunity to use and enjoy a dwelling. This can seem kind of vague, so I want to give a couple examples of what this actually looks like day to day. So one of the most common types of reasonable accommodations that we assist people with are requesting emotional support animals in a building with a no pets policy. Another type of accommodation that we frequently assist people with is getting a reserved accessible parking space in their parking lot. So if you have a parking lot and need an accessible space, and there aren't enough, or maybe there aren't any spaces that are accessible, then you can request one and that it even be reserved for you specifically to ensure that you have parking close to the entrance. Another common type of request that we make for folks is a transfer to a more accessible unit. Say, for instance, you're living on the 3rd floor and your disability is getting worse, and it's really hard to walk up the 2 flights of steps to get to the 3rd floor. In this case, you can request a transfer to a unit on the ground floor so that you don't have to climb any steps. We had another instance where the specific type of floor plan that a person was in was just too narrow for them to use their walker. And so we requested that they be transferred to a different style of 1-bedroom unit so that they were in a unit that they could safely navigate around. We've also helped people who have housing vouchers. Frequently, you have a certain time limit under which you have to find housing by, or you can risk losing your voucher. But if you have a disability-related reason that you need more time for your housing search, you can request an extension for to have more time to look for housing. Another example would be changing the date of rent payment to match when you receive your monthly disability income. So maybe your disability benefits come on the 8th of the month. You could submit a request to pay your rent on the 8th instead of the 1st of the month to match with when you get disability payments. Another possible accommodation, depending on the circumstances, is that you might ask that where you apply not consider a criminal conviction when reviewing an application if it's directly related to a disability. So say, for instance, someone has a psychiatric disorder, is temporarily off of treatment, and maybe commits property damage. You know, a housing provider might be concerned about property damage, but say this happened, 5 years ago, the person's back in treatment and nothing else has happened. You could ask for an accommodation that they not consider this as part of the application review due to it being disability related and the issue hopefully being addressed. So these are various types of accommodations. The main thing to keep in mind is there like a specific policy or rule that is preventing a person with a disability from being able to fully enjoy and access their home like everyone else? And if so, you might be able to request a reasonable accommodation in order to ask for like an exemption or to change that rule so that you can actually have fair access to your housing. So to give an example, a wheelchair user requests an accessible parking space. The landlord approves the request, but says that they don't have the money to pay for it. The tenant must cover the cost of the curb cut and pay for the accessible sign to be installed. So that sign in front of you, the parking space, saying that it's reserved. Do you all think that this is discrimination? I think we have a...
Gonna end the poll in just a moment. All right.
Yes, great job, everyone. So this is discrimination because reasonable accommodations should be free. In this case, I'm actually going to skip this one, Adam, because I haven't covered this yet. My apologies. So generally speaking, reasonable accommodations should be free to tenants. Housing providers should not charge you to in order to grant your reasonable accommodation. So in this case, the landlord is saying, yes, you can have this space, but essentially you have to pay for it. And that's a sign of discrimination. Another example would be for emotional support animals or service animals, for instance. It's illegal for landlords to try to charge a pet fee or to charge pet rent because those animals are not pets. They're necessary for people with disabilities to, live in that housing. So you should not be charged any sort of fee when requesting these sorts of accommodations. If anyone has seen any sorts of fees, I'd love to hear about it in the chat box if anyone wants to share about fees that they might have heard about landlords trying to charge people with disabilities. Another type of fee we've seen landlords try to charge is for unit transfers, where we've asked that someone be allowed to transfer to a unit that's, on the ground floor or more accessible to them. And they'll say, yes, you can transfer, but you have to pay a new application fee. That would also likely be discrimination. A COVID related example is we helped someone who needed to move out of an apartment building because it was too high risk for them for COVID due to their disabilities. And so we asked for the landlords to terminate the person's lease early so that they could move out. And usually there'd be a fee attached with that. But in that case, they were able to move out without paying any sort of fees. So yeah, those are some examples. Another kind of example related to COVID of reasonable accommodations that we have been assisting people with is for folks who are at higher risk of COVID, due to a suppressed immune system or some sort of breathing related disability. They're at higher risk of catching COVID or, experiencing life-threatening symptoms. We've helped people submit requests that anytime someone enters their unit from management, that person has to be wearing a mask or otherwise following COVID-related protocol. We've also asked, for instance, that as few people as possible enter the unit to do repairs so that there's less risk of exposure, things like that. So one of the things that we get a lot of questions about are assistance animals in housing. So I'm going to talk a bit about this, but I also want to be mindful of time. So I'm only going to cover some of this, and I'm happy to answer further questions people have now or in the chat. And I also saw someone put in the chat about issues related to installing a ramp or a wheelchair lift for inaccessible apartments. And I appreciate you adding that, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So for assistance animals, a housing provider, a landlord, cannot require that the animal be a certain breed. For instance, in DC, there are a lot of buildings that do not allow pit bulls. And if a person has an emotional support animal that's a pit bull, the landlord cannot refuse the animal based on the fact that it's a pit bull. That would be illegal. The landlord must allow it. It also cannot require that animals be under a certain weight or size. Some buildings, for instance, require that all pets be under like 25 pounds. And so if someone has, you know, a 75-pound dog, that dog still has to be allowed as an assistance animal. They can also not require that an assistance animal show formal training or certification. This is a really big deal because there are online websites that try to exploit people with disabilities for their money, because they just don't know what information they need to provide to their landlords. So I just want to be really clear that there is no official emotional support animal registry. There is no official service animal registry. There's no official emotional support animal certification, like that this dog specifically or cat is an emotional support animal. All of those sites are fraudulent, and they're just designed to take people, the money of people with disabilities. Okay, let's move on. So in an example, we have a tenant with depression who has a dog as an emotional support animal. And I know I've talked about dogs several times because I personally love dogs. It's my bias showing, but an emotional support animal can be a cat, it can be a fish, it can be a hamster. Just depends on the person. So the animal does not have to be a dog. It's just in this example because I personally wanted to put photos of dogs in this PowerPoint. So a tenant with depression has a dog as an emotional support animal. The housing provider says they will allow the dog, but the tenant will have to pay the pet fee, and the dog cannot weigh over 25 pounds. What do people think? Is this discrimination? Yes, great job, everyone. This is absolutely. Oh, wait, no. I think this question may have jumped. Anyway, yes, this is discrimination. It would be illegal to refuse to allow an animal just because it's over 25 pounds. So in this case, the landlord cannot refuse the animal. They must allow it because landlords cannot apply weight limits to emotional support animals. Okay. So someone brought up wheelchair lifts and ramps earlier. And so the second part that I want to talk about is reasonable modifications. And reasonable modifications are actually a change to the structure of a unit or a common use area so that a person with a disability has full access and enjoyment to that unit. So an accommodation is a change to like a rule or a policy. A modification is a change actually to the physical space of the building. The main reason it's important to know the difference is because that accommodations are free to the tenant. Modifications the tenant has to pay for in most cases. There are some exceptions, but usually the tenant is the one who has to pay for the modifications to be done. These are things like putting grab bars in the bathroom. It could be removing shelves that prevent somebody from getting around their unit. It could be widening a door, putting in a wheelchair ramp, putting in an accessible door opener button. But the thing to keep in mind is that unfortunately the tenant has to pay for it. So frequently what we see is that these modifications are simply too expensive for many folks who would otherwise like to request them. If you do have a modification made to your unit, you are generally required to get the unit back into its original condition if it's reasonable. Examples of when it wouldn't be reasonable is if it doesn't affect the next tenant's use or enjoyment of the unit. So a really easy example of this is if someone widens a door A wider door is never going to make it harder for the next person in the unit, so they would not have to shrink the door back before they moved out. Another reason that you wouldn't have to change everything back is if you make the changes to the exterior of the unit or to common use areas. So say you put a wheelchair ramp in front of the front door, you don't have to remove it after you move out. Okay, so someone asked earlier, how do you actually request an accommodation or a modification? And this is really important. Mira asked, great question, how is this different from a curb cut and signage for a parking space? Parking is the weird one out. Parking is always considered an accommodation. It's not considered a modification. And so that is why it is a tenant. So just know that parking is the like weird exception to what I just said about changing physical space. Thank you for asking that. So parking is always an accommodation, but generally modifications a tenant has to pay for. Okay, so how do we request an accommodation or a modification? Either way, the process is the same. You can make the request in writing or verbally. I always recommend making the request in writing so that you have a record of it. If your disability is not obvious, a housing provider can ask for you to verify it. Examples of obvious disabilities would be, for instance, if someone is blind or deaf, if someone uses like a wheelchair or another sort of assistive device, like a walker or a cane, but you can like visibly see, that would be considered an obvious disability. Examples of disabilities that are not obvious would be, for instance, mental health disabilities like depression or post-traumatic stress disorder, or also like intellectual disabilities like Down syndrome or something like that. So if your disability is not obvious, your landlord might ask you to have that verified. And I'm going to discuss who can verify it in just a minute. Additionally, if the relationship between what you're asking for and your disability is not obvious, they can also ask for you to verify that. So say, for instance, someone using a wheelchair asks for an accessible parking space. Those are both, the disability is obvious, so they don't have to verify that. And the need for an accessible parking space is obvious. They don't have to submit verification for that. But say someone with depression needs an emotional support goldfish. In this case, the mental health disability is not obvious, so they need to submit verification. And just because someone has depression does not mean that an emotional support animal will always help. So they also need verification that the emotional support animal is necessary. So they can ask for that verification as well. A landlord cannot ask for your diagnosis. They cannot ask for how long you've been in treatment. They can't ask how severe your disability is. They can only verify that you have a disability and that the request itself would improve that disability. I want to take a moment to step out of this to answer the question from Debbie about whether there are agencies that can help a tenant with the cost of a modification. And yes, an example of one is the DC Office of Aging has a program called Safe at Home. And that program will help pay for accommodations that folks with disabilities of all ages may need in their home. Let me say that again, I might have said that wrong. They will help pay for any modifications a person might need in their home. So I've worked with someone who the program helped pay for grab bars in their bathroom, things like that. It's also possible in some areas that like your local Center for Independent Living might either provide assistance or know about other programs that are available to you. Okay. So who can verify a disability or the need for an accommodation or modification? The first thing people usually think of is a doctor or medical professional, and they absolutely can verify it, but other people can verify it as well. So a therapist could verify someone's disability. If you have a caseworker, maybe you have a housing specialist that you work with, or a social services caseworker. If you're a survivor of domestic violence and you've been getting services from a domestic violence agency, any sort of like social service provider could verify it as well. Also, a peer support group. So for instance, say you go to Alcoholics Anonymous, someone else in that support group could verify that you have a disability. Or if say you go to another community group space for, group people with disabilities, someone there could as well. A non-medical service agency, so like I was saying with like a social service provider, a caseworker, domestic violence agency, any sort of places like those could help verify it. Or any other reliable third party that knows about the disability and why you need the accommodation. Now, one thing that we have seen is that folks have asked for these verification letters, and the people they're asking don't always know what information to include. And that can result in, for instance, a doctor going into way too much detail about your disability than is actually required. So one of the things that we've done to make this easier is we've created this template that you can give someone to tell them what information they need to include in this letter. So this template is available on our website in English, Spanish, and Amharic. And you're welcome to use it and provide it to someone so that they can properly verify your disability. So a tenant with anxiety has a cat as an emotional support animal. What information do they need to submit to their landlord for their cat? A, verification that you have a disability. B, verification that your emotional support animal improves the symptoms of your disability. Or both of those, A and B.
About to end the poll, and please raise your hand if you guys want to add any clarifications or questions afterwards.
Yes, so this is an example where both would be required. One, that you have a disability, and two, that the emotional support animal would improve the symptoms of your disability. Okay. So what should you do if you think you've experienced housing discrimination? I want to talk a bit about what services the Equal Rights Center may be able to offer. So the first is that we may be able to assist you with advocating with the housing provider to address possible discrimination. So if you have concerns that a landlord might be discriminating against you, either when you apply somewhere or when you're living there, you can contact us and we may be able to contact the landlord on your behalf to try to address those issues. Second is that we assist people with disabilities with submitting reasonable accommodation or reasonable modification requests to housing providers. So all of our services are free, and one of the things we see is that sometimes when people submit these requests, either they're not sure what information they need to include, or their landlords are giving them a lot of pushback and asking for all of this documentation. And so we can actually, from the get-go, start out by helping people submit the request. We will submit it on their behalf, and then we will work with the landlord to make sure that the request is appropriately approved. If they don't approve the request, or say you have other concerns about, other discrimination that may be occurring, another thing that we might be able to do is assist with submitting a housing discrimination complaint with the DC Office of Human Rights or another appropriate agency. And we can go through the complaint process with you step by step so that you know what to expect and you know what's going on. And so that you have someone in your corner who's helping advocate for you throughout that process. We also do civil rights testing, which we talked about at the very beginning of the presentation. So say we think that getting further documentation of, a specific type of discrimination might be helpful, then we might do civil rights testing to try to replicate your experience. And last but not least, we also do accessibility site surveys. So if you live in a building that was built after March of 1991, and you think that it is not built in compliance with accessibility requirements, maybe things are all very difficult, hard to reach, then you can contact us and we will do a survey of your unit or common spaces to make sure that they're in compliance. We've done things like go and review parking lots to make sure that the accessible parking spaces are correctly designed, that they have the access aisles, the curb cuts. I do a lot of site surveys to actually measure door pressure, so to make sure that it's easy to open doors, things like that. Things that it's helpful for you to do if you think that you've experienced discrimination is to make sure to document your experience. So please document, the date and time, who you spoke to or who you contacted. Describe what happened as much as you can remember, who said what, and then keep copies of anything that you submit in writing. So say you submit a reasonable accommodation and you don't hear anything for a month. And then your landlord says, I don't know what you're talking about. I never got this. If you have a copy of it, if you save the email, if you copy a letter that you provided to your property manager, then it's easier to say, actually, this happened, here's my proof. If you want to file a complaint with the Equal Rights Center, you can call us at 202-234-3062, or you can email us at info@equalrightscenter.org. Additionally, I have our intake coordinators information here as well. And I believe that after this presentation, I'm going to be sending the slides out to everyone, I hope. And so we have that included so that you all can access this later on in case you need our information. But you can contact us either directly, you can directly contact Jessie, or if you contact us through our main phone or email, she will also follow up with you. I also just want to quickly promote that we are planning to do another presentation with Douglas Community Land Trust, which we're really excited about, on October 19th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. And that presentation is going to focus more on signs of possible discrimination during a home search. So things to look out for when you're applying to move to a new place. So this is going to be really good for folks if you're a renter and you're looking to move. So I really hope that you can join us next month. So this wraps up my presentation. I think we still have a couple of speakers who are going to be doing some brief overviews about their services as well. And Adam may have a couple of questions for you about your experiences with this presentation, which I would love to hear if we're able to do that.
Go for it.
No, I was just gonna say, we're also gonna have a Q&A period after this. So if you wanna put questions in the chat now or in the next couple minutes, we will start reading them out in a bit and answering those questions. So please stay tuned if you still have questions that have not been answered.
Great. Do you want to do Q&A now? Would that work for you? And we can have, I have one that was sent to me directly that I put in the chat. And then I can open up the polls at the end. Does that work for you, Susan?
Yeah. So a person with a mental health disability is experiencing hallucinations, was told by the landlord to vacate on the basis of violating the leasing agreement. Is this discrimination? The person is disturbing other tenants based on their disability. So if a person is violating their lease, even if it's related to a disability, that may be grounds for eviction. The question I always ask is there an accommodation that could, resolve this? So for instance, somebody got a lease violation for having a pet, but the pet was actually an emotional support animal. That's the time to submit that accommodation to make clear that that animal is not a pet, it's an emotional support animal. This situation is a lot more complex. It sounds like the individual might be harassing other tenants. So the question is there an accommodation that could help resolve this situation so that everyone is living in a safe place? So for instance, maybe, if this person receives new or a different type of treatment that might help with the hallucinations. And if they can show that, they're receiving treatment and that's addressing the issue, then they could ask that they, still be allowed to stay. But because of the complexity of this situation, I would need a lot more context to say clearly, yes or no. Because, if a person is considered a threat to property or the safety of other residents, then, a landlord does not have to grant the accommodation if that, issue is not addressed. So if the harassment of other tenants cannot be addressed through an accommodation, then this person might be at risk of eviction, unfortunately. Someone I know is also asked earlier about whether we are recruiting out-of-state testers. So the Equal Rights Center does have we have a testing program. We use civil rights testers. Anyone is welcome to apply to be a tester. You can do so on our website. We do not have any upcoming trainings right now, and I do not know of any upcoming out-of-state tester needs, but I'm also not in charge of our testing program. So you can always apply. And if we need testers and you seem like a good fit based on where you are or what we're looking for, then we'll make sure to reach out to you. So if you go to the main page of our website, you can apply to be a tester.
In addition, if you want to reach out to me directly, I stay in contact with them pretty frequently as a number of our folks have similar interests, and I check in with the needs, and I might be able to also give you some info or put you on a list to contact when I get an email from Susie's colleague saying, hey, we're going through we're going in for some more testing. So.
Are there other questions? If it's in the chat and I haven't answered it, it's because I didn't see it. So would love for anyone to copy questions if I haven't gotten to it already.
As far as I can see, that covers it. If anybody wants to pop in and ask a question verbally, let me know. If not, maybe we'll leave it open at the end and we can answer a couple more questions. Oh, Joy is raising her hand. We're going to let you. Joy, go for it. If you can unmute, it looks like you will be able to join us.
Thank you. I didn't get your name and title.
Hi, Joy. I'm so sorry. My name is Adam Malone. I'm the Director of Stewardship at the Douglas Community Land Trust.
And what is your name again?
I'm Susie McClanahan. I'm the Fair Housing Rights Program Manager at the Equal Rights Center.
And I will have contact up for us at the very last slide. Anything else? Okay. So running right along, let's jump into Susie. I'm gonna take back control if you don't mind. Thank you for that terrific presentation. We, in addition to working with the Equal Rights Center, we work with some other folks here in DC who are critical partners in the affordable housing sector. So if let me see, can I move this here? Yeah. Jordan, one of our important partners is the Housing and Counseling Services. And Jordan, I think, was going to speak briefly about some of their programs.
Hello, my name is Jordan Kemmer. I'm a program manager at Housing Counseling Services. So Housing Counseling Services is a certified HUD counseling agency. So we have a variety of services. We offer workshops, rental assistance programs, foreclosure programs, and then we have some specialized programming for veterans. And then my department specifically is for people living with HIV. So I just wanted to make sure people had access to this information. The Metropolitan Housing Access Program MAP, it's a centralized source for housing services and housing information. We do intakes for transitional housing, general housing information and referrals. And then we also have pretty robust financial assistance for back rent, first month's rent, utility, mortgage, moving, food, and medication. The numbers are listed there. So right now we have 2 separate intake lines. And then we also have, as detailed, a digital referral form on our website. So you can just put your information in or someone you're referring's information in, and we will get in contact with them to see if they are interested in services. And that's it for me.
Great, thank you, Jordan. Mm-hmm. We are lucky enough to have one of Jordan's colleagues on our board of directors. So we always like working closely with Housing Counseling Services. Another one of our partners is Mikasa. They are both an educator as well as a affordable housing developer. So Zolalem, if you want to speak a little bit. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, my name is Zolalem Tadese. I'm from Mikasa, which is an affordable housing developer and promoter, who has been working in the district for about 30 years. Very soon we are going to celebrate our 30th year. So we are focusing on 3 areas. One is the development of the cooperatives in DC. As Susan was mentioning, there is the right to refuse when a property is unfair. So in the district, low-income residents have the right of refusal at that moment, with help from housing counseling, the LADC and other counseling support organizations. Mikasa will also engage in the formation of tenant association, and then once they are formed, we move towards, if we are selected as their development consultants, we will develop their properties. And we also provide, capacity building trainings. Mikasa has a variety of training programs. And I have just put, our website link on the chat. We are scheduled trainings that we are providing not only for limited equity cooperatives, but also any tenant-based groups or organizations, and even organizations, individuals are all welcome. Mikasa also has a rental department, and we have about 12 properties owned and controlled by Mikasa. And this kind of fair housing training and this kind of information are also directly applicable to what we are doing, in managing those properties, and also in serving as a development consultant for limited equity cooperatives. We are planning to have similar training on fair housing. My colleague Robert, another project manager, is coordinating that. Is scheduled for October 7. Maybe that will be put on our website again. If anyone is interested, you are welcome, and you can register through our website. And there are other, we are working with, Adam together in other workshop sessions. And I'm happy that I'm part of this group. Thank you.
Always appreciate working with Mikasa, and especially with Slalom. Wrapping up, we're going to have Tiffany, one of our board of directors, who does double duty as tenant association president, say a couple words, and then I'll close us out.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Good evening, everyone. I'm so excited. I was the one who put this in the chat. I'm so excited to be here. I did a little small conference with Adam and Susan earlier, and I was excited to know that they were bringing forth this information to the families in our communities, because it is much needed information. We don't get the proper service that we need because we don't know. We don't know where to reach out to. We don't know where to go. We don't know where to look. So we stay and become complacent, and we just get stuck. So I first want to say thank you all so much for coming back to just service us and give us more, so that we know where we can go and what we can do should any of these situations arise, not just for ourselves, but for our neighboring communities and the families on our property. I am a part of Douglas Community Land Trust for over, I guess, gosh, it's been about over 2.5, 3 years. It has been a long time. I am a fan favorite of the Douglas Community Land Trust. Douglas CLT, what we do, we try to make sure that to foster an environment that helps communities engage more and thrive towards getting back to community. We want our families to be in the know about the services and things that are going on around them. Douglas CLT always sponsors events for ideas and for upcoming projects that are in your area and in your neighborhood. And I always encourage my families to please sign up and get involved. You need to know what's going on in the community around you, because your community is not just you. And you don't want to get left behind, because it is forever changing. So you need to be in the know. They are Douglas CLT plants the roots of affordability for current and future generations. And they also preserve the rights for permanent affordable housing. And I know firsthand how Douglas CLT has come in and allowed us to be able to sustain permanent affordability for our homes. They came in, and it was the classical gentrification, as they want to call it, takeover. And Douglas stepped up and said, no, these people have been in their homes. My parents are the longest living tenants on the property, 28 years. And Douglas came in and said, no, we cannot displace these families. We want to make sure that their housing is affordable for them for many, many years to come. So I tip my hats off to Douglas. I'm so glad that I joined the board, because I too want to be involved with helping people save their homes and living a more quality life towards, wanting to be there, wanting to be in a place where they can call home, even if it's not home ownership. That's a big deal, especially in the District of Columbia today. So I want to say thank you to Douglas CLT for putting together all of this, and just for the things that they do. And I am just ecstatic that I am on the board, and I am so grateful to be in the know in my community through Douglas CLT. Thank you all so much.
Great. Thank you, Tiffany. We appreciate your service on both boards. So And of course, thank you so much to Susie and to the Equal Rights Center for putting this presentation together. Susie, I have a little bit of late breaking news. Not only do we have the October 19th event, but you'll see we have a November 16th event with your colleague, which will be the partner presentation to this with a focus on complying with reasonable accommodation requests. I see we have a number of folks from the management community on this call, and so as well as co-op leaders. And so we want to make sure that everybody knows how to quickly address these issues for folks. Additionally, October 6th and every first Wednesday, we have our new and prospective member orientation. We are a membership organization. As Tiffany mentioned, we are democratically directed. And so we encourage folks to join up, to become a member. Go to our website at douglasclt.org. Become a member and then participate in the governance of this organization. So I am going to open up a survey for you all for our friends over at Equal Rights Center. I would ask that y'all take the moment or two to fill this out. This is so you don't get an extra email from me coming later in the week. So if you have a moment, we appreciate you just quickly filling it out. And in the meantime, I guess we can answer any lingering questions that any of you all may have. So other than that, I want to thank my folks again for participating. Thank you to all our community partners. And you all are released. If you please do consider filling out the survey. But we hope everybody has a safe and pleasant afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.
Douglas Community Land Trust is a membership organization. We invite you to join.